When I was a parent, I always felt bad about being up here with lollies because I knew what it did to my kids, but now I'm a grandparent. It doesn't feel so bad. I don't know what that is, but anyway. Hey, so I was hoping that some of our young, smart people could give me a bit of a hand today, a bit of feedback, because we're going to be talking about the Philistines today. Now, can anyone tell me a famous Philistine? And if you need a clue, I can give you a clue. Okay, Greta. Goliath, yes. I think you deserve one of these. Take that home. It's got red food colouring in it. Do your heaps. Great. Perfect. Excellent. Righto. Right. So Goliath. And what was special about Goliath? Yeah, ask. Yes, that's right. Yeah, that deserves one. Can I have one? Right. I can probably throw it to you. Yep. Cool. Righto. Now, who took Goliath down? Arch. David, yes. Well done. Okay. Now, this is probably getting, that was sort of the easy ones just to get you all warmed up, get you in the groove. What's that? Sure, it'll be fine. What could possibly go wrong? Okay, now that was sort of easy. Okay, so now, were the Philistines goodies or baddies in the Bible? Anyone? Yes? Up the back? Anyone want to have a crack at that? Were the Philistines, so remember Goliath, big, tall, terrifying Goliath, were they goodies or baddies? Who's up? Yeah, Addy. Were they goodies or baddies? Baddies, yes, you're right. Here. Well done. Okay. Oh, sorry. Okay, so now, that was the obvious stuff. So from now on, where's the clicker, you reckon, up here somewhere? Oh, sorry. Good on you. What we're going to do, we're going to be reading out of 1 Samuel, and as you guys, probably most of you know, we've been going through a series on 1 Samuel. Thanks. And we're sort of getting nearly to the end of 1 Samuel. We've got one more, I think, next week. But I'm just going to read a little bit, and there's something in here that you've got to watch, okay? So I'm going to ask a question. Okay, are you ready? Steve Cavill's ready. That's good. Anyone else? Christine, she looks ready? Okay. Righto, so 1 Samuel 29, and then verses 1 to 2. Now, it says, now the Philistines brought all their forces, all their army together at Aphek, while Israel camped by the spring in Jezreel. So the Philistines, baddies, were getting ready to fight the Israelites, the goodies, and they were going to be right up the top. I don't know if you can see that map, but Aphek is about right nearly at the top of that green area. So that green area is pretty much the land that the Philistines controlled, and all around the other side, that side, that's Israel. So that was where Saul and the Israelites pretty much controlled. But the Philistines were getting all their armies together, and they were heading to Aphek, right up the top, to fight with the Israelites. Okay. So, as the Philistine leaders marched out with their units of hundreds and thousands, dun, 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 this is the bit you've got to be watching, David and his men marched behind them with Achish. Didn't we just say Philistines were baddies and David was goodies? Like he killed Goliath? What? Is this fair? Is this in the Bible? Can anyone just check, maybe have a quick look? Is that really in there? Does that seem right? Have you ever seen an army where the goodies and the baddies march together? That doesn't happen in a war. Did you ever see the Anzacs and the Nazis sort of just happily marching along together? No, they were too busy killing each other. So what's going on here? How can anyone, for the whole rest of the bag of these, can anyone tell me what is going on? Ask. It's worth a try. Like an ambush. Ambush. No. Yes. Yes, over here. What do you reckon it is? That is so right. Here, come and get this whole bag. Done. Your mother will never talk to me ever again, but hey, that is so right. So now, if you'd been away for a week or two, and you were going, hey, what is going on here? That doesn't sound right, does it? It doesn't sound right that David was the guy that killed Goliath, the Philistine. Not only that, he went and got 200 bits of Philistines for his bride price. This is not a guy who's a friend of the Philistines. And next minute, he's marching with them. What? So now, you would, if you were here last week, you would have heard about that. You would have heard what happened. But if you'd been away for a week or two, or if you slept through the sermon last week or something like that, which you wouldn't have done, I guarantee, you would have been going, what is going on? So as you heard last week, so David chose, and Archer had it right, David chose to go to the Philistines for help rather than to trust God. And I think last week we touched on the idea that he was acting out of fear rather than faith. And you go, oh, well, David, what a dill, he's supposed to be this great leader. But let's just sort of flesh that out a bit, and let's give him some grace, because if we look, I think this is going to work. No, that's if we look at it. So when David was anointed, I don't know if you remember, right at the start of this sort of series, Samuel, who was the last sort of judge, the last sort of prophet leader of Israel, God directed him to appoint David as king, even though they had already had Saul as a king. But David was somewhere between 10 and 15 years old. So who in the church here is between 10 and 15? Arch, Greta, yep, a few others. So potentially, that's how old David was. You guys, when God said, hey, it'd be like someone coming and say, hey, Arch, you're going to be king. You're going to be prime minister, mate. So you go, oh, right, eh? Yeah. Well, that's a good point. We'll won't go there. So David had been anointed at a very young age. God had said to him, mate, you are going to be king. And so David then went, and I don't know if you've followed the story of David through. He went and he actually was in the court of Saul for a long time. He used to play his harp to try and calm Saul down. Saul was sort of in the process of going crazy, and then David killed Goliath, probably around that sort of teenager age, maybe 14, 15. No one's really sure, but around that age, that's when he killed Goliath. He wasn't a grown man. He was only quite young when he killed Goliath. And then he became a commander in Saul's army at a very young age. So he was 10 and 15 when he was anointed as king. He had 5 or so years, which were probably okay sort of years. He was in Saul's court, was sort of in Saul's army, leading up, and even at a young age, he was very successful in battle. And people used to sing songs about it, even as a young man. But then things changed. Saul started to lose the plot big time. Saul was very jealous of him. Saul sort of started to believe that David was out to get him. So Saul spent most of his time trying to kill David. So for about 8 years or so, David literally was on the run. So just think about that. He's probably early 20s at best. Early 20s. Everyone wants to kill David. So if you have a look up on that map, so you can see where the Philistines are. So Israel is all the white. There's another map, all this sort of white side on the right hand side. So pretty much everyone in Israel under Saul is out to kill David. The Philistines over here, pretty much they all want to kill David. And then down the bottom, it's just on the bottom of that, but that's the land of the Amalekites. So the bottom of that is the Negev desert. So it's a pretty horrible. Even if you go on Google Earth now and have a look at the Negev desert, it's pretty barren, ordinary sort of country. And even back then it was even worse. So David pretty much is surrounded by everyone wants to kill him. And so you go, well, David, you big sook, you went and ran away and you went and joined the Philistines. Where else was he going to go? If he goes to the Amalekites, I'm going to tell you, Amalekites, I'm going to tell you a little bit about them. They are not nice people. They are very unnice people. Philistines want to kill him because he's obviously been working on them pretty hard. And then Saul decides he wants to go. So really, David had nowhere to go. His options were pretty limited. And it's been going on for nearly 10 years. Saul's been chasing it. So the place where he should have been safe, with his family, in his homeland, in the king that he was completely loyal to, he should have been safest there. And yet Saul wanted to kill him. So I think David had 10 years of that. And they were young, like when he was a young man. I think he was weary. He had it. He was sick of running. And I think Steve shared that passage last week where he said, look, sooner or later, if I hang around here, Saul's going to get me. And it was like he just said, I've got all of my choices are bad ones. I'm going to try and maybe make the least worst choice. But it's interesting that he didn't seek God's direction at that time. Anyway, have that in the back of your mind. So you could say, well, David had a couple of opportunities, at least two definitely that we know of, where he could have taken Saul out. He would have fixed the problem. He literally had a knife, basically, that he could have finished Saul at least twice. But he didn't. Yeah, and why didn't he? To me, that would have made so much sense. Like, everyone around me wants to kill me. Here's the guy that's my main problem. What if I take him out? God's already told me I'm going to be king. How about I just take him out? We'll move the agenda up a bit quicker than what God was doing, and we'll get the job done. But no, David was loyal and faithful to what God had anointed. So he says there, because his mate Abishai came with him. In the picture there, they came and they snuck into the camp. Everyone was asleep, and they literally got to Saul where he was sleeping, picked up his sword and his water jug that was right beside his head as he was sleeping. They could have just, no worries at all. Abishai says, Abishai says, let's kill him, let's do it. And David says to his mate, no, we can't do that. It says, do not destroy him, for who can extend a hand against the Lord's anointed? So even though Saul was pretty much crazy by this stage and David was threatened, his life was threatened at every turn, David said, no, he is still the guy that God appointed. We can't touch him. Amazing. So this amazing loyalty and amazing sense of obedience to God from Saul. And it said, this is what David said to Saul across a ravine after they'd been and done that. They said, look, the Lord delivered you into my hand today, but I would not extend my hand against the Lord's anointed. There's that wording again. He still believes Saul is the anointed one by God. As surely as I valued your life today, so this is David speaking, as surely as I let you live today, so may the Lord value my life and rescue me from all these trouble. And you think that Saul would have said, oh, well, gee, that was pretty good. I'll let you off. Didn't happen. So, as bad an option as this is, when you go to your sort of mortal enemies and say, look, can I come and live at your place? Be sort of like the Scorpions going to Blackhall and saying, look, can we just use your clubhouse for training? I don't know, something like that. But if you put yourself in David's shoes, potentially, so they went to Achish. Achish said, look, righto, you can have this town called Ziklag. You can go down there, set yourselves up. So there's about, David's had 600 men in his family, so probably a couple of thousand people, probably size of a bit smaller, Longreach, maybe Blackwell, Barkey side, that sort of. So that was the size of the camp. And so David and his men got comfortable there. They were there about a year and a half, really, probably about a year and a half before this all happened. So they were there, they were comfortable, they suddenly didn't have to run anymore. So prior to this, they were always on their guard, always on watch, waiting for someone to kill them. But this was a time when they could actually be somewhere and sort of have a sense of comfort. It was a little bit like a comfort zone, even though it was in the middle of everyone that wanted to kill them. So even though it seems bad, you can sort of see how David might have got to that point. But did you ever wonder, well, I certainly did, what was Achish thinking? What was he thinking? So here's this guy, this David. David's got 600 battle-hardened men. Like, these guys pretty much have been fighting continually for the last 8 or 10 years. So there's these real warriors come to him and say, hey, you know how we used to try and kill you all the time and you used to do terrible things to you and what have you? Now we want to stay at your place. Is that okay? Why didn't Achish say, no, get out of here, what are you thinking? But he didn't. And it's interesting because, if you know, like when someone says to you, oh, you're such a Philistine, is that a compliment? No, normally, if someone says you're such a Philistine, it means you're not very refined or sophisticated, doesn't it? It means you're sort of a bit of a buffhead, really, probably. And there's a reason for that, because the Philistines were pretty much like that. Most of the Philistines sort of were, I guess, you know, if you ran into a Philistine in a dark alley, he would probably go, "Hello, I'm Philistine, I have big hammer and sword, I kill you now." That was about as sophisticated as it got. They were not about finesse, they were about brute force. So remember, Goliath, big scary man, that was pretty much the epitome of Philistines. But Achish was actually a bit of a refined Philistine, if you like. It said he was very wily. He had military prowess, so he was good at killing people, as you had to be a Philistine. But he also had some sort of diplomatic acumen, like he was a bit sort of politically savvy. And so, I'll just zip this. Oops, no, that's it there. So that's the one, yeah. So this map is one of those. So I don't know if you can see, so where the brown area is, that's pretty much the area that Saul and the Israelites controlled. So that's pretty much Israel at this stage. If you go over to the left there, the little strip between the sea and that is where the Philistines were. So that sort of area there. Aphek is up the top, just near that purpley arrow. That's pretty much the top of the Philistine area, and Ziklag's down the bottom here, Gaza, that's down the bottom. Philistine was interesting. Like they didn't have sort of one king, and they sort of didn't have like states like we do have in Australia, like there wasn't Queensland or whatever. They had 5 main cities, and so there was a king of each city. And those kings within that city pretty much control that city and the area of land around them. And so when Achish, he was king of Gath. I don't know if you can see, it's about halfway up in the middle there. Yep. He was king of Gath. So it was that was his city, and he controlled the area around it. And so each of these kings, like they were pretty, what's the word? Like they pretty much looked out for their own patch, pretty much. But they also then, when they had to, they would get together and operate as one country. So it was sort of like 5 little countries all together, but operating as one, if that makes sense. Anyway, so most of the Philistine kings were the standard Philistine type. Just, they liked to kill people, and that was it. Pretty much, that's as complicated as it got. But Achish went, he actually was a bit smarter than that. So in his reign, or while he was the king of Gath, he actually built Gath up into probably the most influential city in Philistine, because he was really good at sort of doing deals and getting people on side, and like a good politician, I guess. So when David came to him, and I don't know if you remember, this is the second time that David came to Achish. Does anyone remember the first time? I haven't got any more lollies left, but I could probably do a deal with Archie later. Do you remember what happened the first time that Achish met David? Yeah. He did. He acted like he was crazy. So he was on the run, and that was very early when he was on the run. He was desperate. He gets to Gath, and someone recognised him and said, "Hang on, that's David." And David thought, "Oh, that's not good." So he pretended to be crazy. And Achish said, "Well, look, get this guy out of here. I've got enough crazy people already. Get him out of here." So that was the first time. And now this is several years later. So in that intervening time, David has got together a band of men. He's got together an army, basically 600 men, and they are good soldiers. So when David comes the second time, it's a different story. Like, it's not David desperate on the run, "I've got to be crazy and let me get out of here." This is David with an army, basically. And so Achish goes, "Hey, I've got 2 choices here. I could try and get rid of this guy, but then I've got this 600 strong army running around my territory, causing havoc and potentially who knows what. Or I could try and get him on side, because David's army was pretty much like the SAS. They were good soldiers. Like, pretty much if they got to this point after 8 to 10 years of fighting and being on the run, they were good. They were either dead or they were good. So these guys were good. And so Achish says, "Right, well, I'm gonna give this a crack." So he says to David, "Yeah, sure. You guys come and be with me. You be part of my army. You be my bodyguard. But I'm going to tuck you right down the bottom, out of the way, just in case." So he puts them right down at Ziklag, which is right on the bottom pretty much of the Philistine territory. It's from there south is pretty much the Negev desert. So, it's not like it's the Gold Coast or whatever. It's pretty average. But anyway, David and his men go there and settle in and get some comfort. So that's why, we haven't got to the sermon yet. This is just the build-up. So this is why David is marching with the Philistines, which is just crazy. He's marching with the mortal enemies of the Israelites. That's how we've got to this point. So it's as Steve said last week, there's this sense of not trusting in God. It's probably a sense of desperation, of weariness, of just wanting somewhere that they can regroup and get some comfort from life. That's how we get to this. But so they're on the march. So the Philistines have gathered at Aphek, which is right up the top at the bottom of that purple area. They are getting all their men together, ready to go and wipe out as many of the Israelites as they can. So David has got sucked into this. So all of these poor choices that he's made have brought him to this, where he's actually marching. And I wonder if he's going, what am I doing? I'm marching with the Philistines. I'm just about to go and kill my family. You wonder what was going through his head. But he sort of painted himself into a corner. Because if he pulled out now, the Philistines are going to say, well, hang on, hey, I thought you were... Because he'd spent a whole, as Steve mentioned last week, he'd spent this whole year basically building this persona that he was harassing the Israelites and raiding them and whatever, when he really wasn't. He was actually going down into the Amalekite territory and all of those and sort of harassing and raiding those areas. So he'd convinced the Achish and the Philistines that he was on their side, so he couldn't back out now, but he didn't want to go and fight his family and his nation. So I wonder if he's just marching going, oh, what's going to happen? What's going to happen? But it was amazing. God stepped in. And God used the most unlikely saviour, if you like. So remember I said there was 5 kings of Philistine, basically. So Achish was one, and there was 4 other cities, and there was 4 other kings. So these 4 other kings go, what? Go to Achish and say, what's going on? You're bringing this David, this killer of Philistines, this mutilator of Philistines. I've got an uncle Phil the Philistine. Remember what he did to Phil? Yeah, Phil never recovered from that, I'll tell you. But these kings said, no way. David's not going to be fighting with us, because when he gets to the Israelites, every chance he'll turn on us and go with them. So amazingly, the Philistine kings were the ones who got David out of a terrible dilemma. So Achish says, well, look, David, he said, look, if it was up to me, I'd take you with me. But the fellas, the boys, we've had a meeting, and we've said, no, you can't come. You've got to go home. So they send David back down to Ziklag. And Ziklag, from Aphek to Ziklag, is about 80 kilometres, and it's not a bitumen road, even in those days. It's up and down, and there's, so it takes them a while. It takes them a bit over 2 to 3 days. Well, it says that they got there on the 3rd day, so at least 2 days travel. So this is not, in the back of the Toyota Corolla. This is actually, you're marching, you've got your armour, you've got your weapons, you've got everything, all your supplies with you. So it's a fairly full-on sort of march. So it takes it out of them. So it says there they got 80k, got there on the 3rd day, and what they found was their home was burnt. So while they'd been away up in the north, ready to sort of start marching with the Philistines, the Amalekites down the bottom, they sort of, so Amalekites were not nice people. So if you find anything about the Amalekites, they basically were an incestuous tribe of people that descended from Esau. So remember Esau? He was the hunter, like Isaac and Esau. Esau was the one that went out and hunted, so he was a rough, gruff sort of guy. So that was where this family came from, but it was a whole messy family situation. And even to this day, often Jewish people will use Amalekite to represent evil. Like they would say, like Hitler. Hitler was Amalekite. Even though it just means, it's sort of like their word basically for an evil person is an Amalekite. So their sense of, that's how bad these people were to the Israelites. And they were nomadic people, so they didn't really farm, they basically just killed people for a living and took what they had. That's how they survived. So they were just like a nomadic sort of raiding bunch of scary people. And so when David and his men get back to Ziklag, it says there on the 3rd day, David and his men arrived in Ziklag, and the Amalekites had raided the had raided the Negev, so they'd been on a bit of a raiding trip. They got to Ziklag, they'd burnt it down, and they'd taken captive the women and all who were there, both young and old. They had not killed anyone, which was unusual, but they had carried them off as they went on their way. So when David and his men came to the city, they found it burned down, and their wives and sons and daughters were taken captive. So David and the troops with him lifted up their voices and wept until they had no strength left to weep. If you were going to pick someone to take your wife and family away, these are the last guys you would want to pick. They were the meanest, just the worst. So these men, these 600 men, remember they're battle hardened, they've seen some terrible stuff over their time, but they've been living on the edge for years. And you know, for about a year and a half, they've had this sort of sense, almost a false sense of comfort. You know, they've been living in Ziklag with their families and sort of settling down and, you know, building this town up. And suddenly they come home and it's all gone. And it also somehow seems more devastating than when they were on the run, when they had nothing to lose. But you know, they had something. They had this town, this community, this home, this sort of sense of comfort and safety maybe. And suddenly it was just gone. So the whole town was burnt. All of their family, their kids, the mums, the kids, all gone. And the men, these men, they'd followed David through thick and thin, through some very tough times. They'd seen amazing success in battle, and they'd seen God miraculously work through David, and they finally dropped their bundle. And it says that they wept aloud until they had no more strength to weep. These are hard men. Have you ever wept that much? Have you ever been that grieved that you just run out of tears or run out of words? You know, David had lost his family as well. It says David's two wives, Ahinoam of Jezreel and Abigail, the widow of Nabal of Carmel, had been taken captive. And David was greatly distressed because the people, so his men who had been through everything with him, they're so grieving and so angry that they say, we're going to stone David. So that was the last thing David had, was his men. Like, his town's gone, his wives are gone, his kids are gone, and suddenly his men, who have been his sort of like his security, his comfort, his right hand, say, look, we've had enough, David. You know, I don't know if that was a poor military decision or whatever, to go up and leave no one there to defend the town. I don't know, whatever. Lots of argument about that. But his men blamed. They didn't have anyone to blame other than David. And so they said, right, that's it, we've had it with you. We're ready to stone him. That's how bad it had gotten. David was at his lowest point. And you can understand the men, like, what else? You know, these Amalekites have taken everything. And David, we've been following you. You've been our leader, and you've let us down. You know, leaders shouldn't leave us in this situation. It really doesn't get much worse than this for David. He's at his lowest point. So what does he do? There's a but. And it's a really important but. It says but. So remember, everything's gone. He's literally in the ashes of his life. The town is still smouldering and burning around him. He's sitting there in the dust. Got nothing. And it says, but David found strength in the Lord. Even at the very bottom, when everything seemed out of control, David found strength in the Lord his God. And I was debating about whether to have this in or not, but I'll throw it in there and see what happens. You know, some of you might know our story, me and Raylene and our family. Some might not. We got two boys. They're about 4 years apart, and in between, after our oldest son was born, about 2 years in, we lost our bubby in between those two. And it was a pretty tough time, you know, for all of us, for a whole bunch of reasons. And, you know, we got through that, and then about 2 years later, our youngest son was born, and he had some very big challenges at birth, very big, to the point where he wasn't expected to live. In fact, the doctors gave us a choice to, you know, yeah. And Actually, that was one of the 2 times that I've cried to the point where there was no tears left. I just ran out of tears. It was a pretty tough time. And, there was a sense, though, in all of that. It couldn't, we had emergency flight to Brisbane, emergency surgery over a couple of days, all of the stuff, the ICU, the whole thing. And it seemed hopeless. It really seemed hopeless. It seemed like everything was gone. And yet somehow, in all of that, there was a bottom to that. It was like we found strength in the Lord. And you probably when you hear people talk about that, it's normally the super duper Christian type people, isn't it? The people that, the ones that get up at 4 a.m. and read their Bible before having their breakfast of unleavened bread and, going out to evangelise 1,000 people before smoko. Well, I wasn't one of those people. Still not. I think I was 34 at the time. I've been a Christian, I think, about 13 years at the time, so I was a pretty young Christian, really. I've been married for 7 years, and for about 4 of those 7 years, we'd had a pretty significant sort of mental health challenge and journey. I'm pretty sure I wasn't reading my Bible regularly. I can probably nearly guarantee that regularly. And I don't know if I was praying regularly either back then, Probably just surviving, really. That's what it felt like, I think, in those times. It was just surviving. I was full of fear and lack of faith. Probably didn't have a lot of internal strength. I think my family was the most important thing to me at that time, but it had been totally upside down and turned around and looked like it was in all sorts of trouble. But I had this little bit of faith, somehow. And the little bit of faith I had was in someone that had all the power and all the strength. And so God gave us a strength at that time, gave us a bottom to that grieving, to that suffering that I'd never experienced before. I'd never seen that before. It was quite amazing. So if he did that for me, just a buffhead who probably was lucky enough that God blessed me with an amazing lady and family, if he could do that for me, surely he's going to do something for David. Now David, God said about David, he's a man after my own heart. God said that about him. So God's going to give him a strength, surely. And there's some verses up there, and I mean, most of those Psalms are written by David. It says there in the first one, Psalm 18, in my distress, I called to the Lord. I cried to my God for help. So David, in the middle of ashes and just everything falling apart, knew what to do. I sought the Lord and he answered me. He delivered me from all my fears, Psalm 34. I waited patiently for the Lord. He turned to me and heard my cry. He lifted me out of the slimy pit, out of this muck, out of this just total disaster. He lifted me up out of that. Out of the mud and mire. He set my feet on a rock and gave me a firm place to stand. Just when I was getting this ready, I just had this picture of David kneeling in the ashes and just the Lord coming down to him and saying, come on, mate, what are we doing here? And just lifting him up out of that. Because that's what it says. David found strength in the Lord. The Lord lifted him up out of that. And from here, there's an Isaiah I put up there later. I mean, that was written later, but it says, they that wait for the Lord shall renew their strength. So you imagine David and his men. They'd just marched 80 kilometres with all their gear. They'd got to this disaster with all their family, got like total emotional, physical, just totally must have been worn out. But it says, the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings like eagles. They shall run and not be weary, and they shall walk and not faint. And out of this, we see the David of old. We see the David that relies on God, that seeks God. The David that trusts God. And he goes straight away and he goes, right. He gets the priest. We said, we've got to ask God what to do. This seems like a total mess. What are we going to do? These guys have been here. They've raided. They're the desert experts. They know the desert way better than anyone. And they've been and they've gone. Are we even going to catch them? Even if we tried to find them, will we catch them? He asked God. And it says there, David said to Abiathar the priest, the son of Ahimelech, bring me the ephod. And Abiathar brought it to him, and David inquired of the Lord, should I pursue these raiders? Will I overtake them? Pursue them. The Lord replied, for you will surely overtake them and rescue the captives. So it's not in the word there, but this next part is amazing. So David must have had to go to his men, the same men that were ready to stone him, the same men that were just so angry with him. David had to go to them and say, guys, God's told me that we have to go and pursue these raiders. These horrible, cruel, terrible Amalekites that were just terrible people, and they're experts in the desert. But yeah, we have to go and pursue them. How did his men follow him? Why would they follow him? They literally were ready to stone him 5 minutes ago. And yet suddenly they say, right, yeah, we've just come 80 kilometres, we're just about had it, but sure, we'll follow you into the desert and try and find these crazy raider guys. I think somehow people could see in David the hand of God. I think it's the only way that those men would have followed him into the desert. And it says there, so David and his 600 men went to the brook of Besor, which probably on that map is a bit further. So basically they were heading straight south into the desert from Ziklag. About 20 k's roughly, they think it's called the brook of Besor, but really it's a ravine of Besor. When you look at it, so it's pretty much the desert is pretty much like what you'd expect, the desert sort of flat rolling sort of hills. Then there's this sort of gash through it, which is the Besor River or creek or whatever, wadi, I think they call it. So it's quite a drop down in and out, and it can be flooded at times. Don't know what it was. Anyway, 200 of his men said, look, we're done. We're cooked. We cannot go anymore. We can't even cross this thing here. That's the straw. So he goes from 600 men down to 400 men. He says, right, I'll leave those 200 there. The other 400 men somehow get across that, and then they head into the desert. And I was going to say, I did write down here, it's not, like that photo probably doesn't show anything, but really it's sort of not like Grand Canyon, but it's like that sort of a desert thing where it's just, yeah, anyway, you get the picture. So that's probably where they headed out. Once they hit that, that's what they were heading into. So it's sort of, they call it the open country, and I guess there's not many trees in that picture, so that's what. Anyway, they found an Egyptian. They found this guy out in the middle of nowhere like that. He'd been left there for a couple of days. The Amalekites, as we said, they're pretty cruel, pretty whatever. This guy had got crook. And so he was a slave to one of the Amalekite soldiers or raiders. And so the fellow just left him there in the desert to die, basically. And so David and his men going through and find him. And they don't know who he is at this stage. He's just a stranger in the desert, half dead. And they give him a feed. They give him some, I think it says raisins and dates and whatever, and give him a drink, and he comes good. He comes good. And would you believe it? That's why I put found in God put this guy on their path, because he was part of the party that had just raided Ziklag. Like, he hadn't done it, but he was a slave to one of the guys that had just been at Ziklag. So he knew exactly what had happened. He knew exactly where they were going, and he knew how to get there. So he gets David to promise not to give him back to his slave master. But he said, you do that, I'll show you how to find these guys. So God literally. So you imagine going out, there's the desert, somewhere out there, and if you look at the Negev desert, it's massive. Somewhere out there is our families with these crazy Amalekites. How are we going to find them? And wouldn't you believe it, God puts the dying slave right in their path. And David, like you think about it, so like, I guess David was still, this is good quality David. He's compassionate. So remember, he's got his 400 men. They're desperate to find their families. They're on the run. They've been marching for days. You know, here's a half-dying man. It would have been tempting just to go, hey, look, just leave him to the side. Let's get on with the job. But they stopped. They got him. They fed him. Gave him a drink. It would have slowed them down. But God had a plan in that. So the compassion that they showed led them to restoration. It said, so this is the Egyptian guy, he led David down, and there they were, the Amalekites. There they were, scattered over the countryside, eating, drinking, and reveling because of the great amount of plunder they had taken from the land of the Philistines and from Judah. David fought them from dusk. So, amazing story. These guys had been marching flat out for about 4 days by this stage, and they go straight into a battle, and they fight all night long. I can remember years ago we fought a bushfire from daylight till dawn the next day. I could hardly stand up after that. But these guys literally had marched for probably nearly 100 kilometres, and then straight into a battle where they fought all night. They fought from dusk until evening of the next day, and none of them got away except 400 young men who rode off on camels and fled. So a handful of Amalekites got away. So David recovered everything the Amalekites had taken, including his 2 wives. Nothing was missing, young or old, boy or girl, plunder or anything else they had taken. David brought everything back. Now, that sort of blows my mind a little bit. So these Amalekites, they're just horrible, vicious, terrible people, and yet they didn't kill anybody. They didn't actually use up any of David's plunder, like they had other plunder from the other places they'd been, but all of David's family, his kids, his wives, the whole group, plus their gear and stock and everything, was still there, still intact. Amazing. And so from the ashes, like 2 days before, they were sitting in the ashes of their burning town with their families gone, and suddenly they've got it all back, plus more, because these guys picked up all the other stuff that the Amalekites had sort of gathered along the way. So I guess the message for me out of this passage is that God restores. So even though maybe David had taken his eyes off God and made some poor choices and made some dumb decisions, God restored everything. Psalm 23, it's a psalm that David wrote. It says, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul." So this is David. Remember David in the ashes? God said, "I'll restore your soul." He leads me in paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Now that's Old Testament. That's David writing that in the Old Testament. In the New Testament, Jesus said a very similar passage or a similar vein. He said, "Come to me, all of you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I'm gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls." David, God restores my soul. Jesus, you will find rest for your souls. My yoke is easy, my burden is light. So where do we sit today? You know, the whole Bible really is there. It's not only a historical document, but it's a living document that speaks to us today. You know, are we sort of somewhere, can we identify with what David was talking about here for his situation? Have we painted ourselves into a corner, you know, where we sometimes wake up and go, how did I get here? How did I end up in this situation? How did I make these dumb choices that have led me to be sitting here marching with the Philistines when I know this is not where I'm meant to be? You know, and like I'm not having to go at you, and like sometimes we have to make those choices to survive, or maybe we felt we've had to make those choices to survive, but we're just too weary to keep putting up with it. Too weary to have that fight about it. Too weary to keep running. Have we done things out of fear because we were worried what might happen, and not out of faith or trust in God? Or maybe we feel like David, we just don't have the options. He didn't have many options, you know, of where to go. Maybe that's how we feel, that we're in a place where all of our options seem pretty ordinary. But we know we're not in the right place. We're in Ziklag. in amongst our enemies instead of with our family, the place we were meant to be. You know, like I said up there, God is a restorer. Our God is a healer. Jesus said, and it's one of my favourite verses, he said he didn't come to condemn us. Jesus did not come to condemn you. He came to save us. He came to lean down into those ashes and pull us up and out. That's what he came to do. John 10:10 says he came to give us life. So that picture of David in the dust, of God leaning down to reach up and to pull him up. That's what Jesus wants to do for us. Wants to heal us, wants to restore us. He can bring that life that he promised us out of the ashes of where we are right now. If there's some part of your life that you go, well, hang on, I know this isn't right. I'm not meant to be here. This is Ziklag. This is not Israel. Then Jesus wants to deal with that. What do we do? What do we need to do? We need to do what David did. We need to strengthen ourselves in the Lord. Look to the Lord. That's where our hope comes from. We need to seek him and his wisdom, and then obey his leading. Exactly what David did. We need to come home to where we belong, where we're meant to be. And to let God just restore and heal that hurt. We're going to finish, I think, with a song. But afterwards, if you feel like there's something that you need to deal with today, like I really have a sense that there's parts of our lives that we know aren't right. We're not in the right place. I'd love for you to come up here and we're going to pray with you. Because Jesus wants to heal and restore today. He doesn't want you to live in those ashes any longer than you have to. So we're going to do that. I'm going to be up here, and if there's a bunch of people, we'll get some of the leaders to come down and we're going to pray. And we want to deal with that stuff today. We don't want that holding us back any longer. Let's pray. Lord, just as you rescued David out of the ashes of Ziklag, we know that you want to rescue us out of the places that we aren't meant to be in, Lord. We're meant to be with you, meant to be living that abundant, full life with you, Lord. That's where we want to be, Lord. Please bring us home to that, Lord. I just pray you'll just put on our hearts now, if there's things that we need to deal with you today, Lord, please put it on our heart. Help us to hand that over to you, Lord, because it says that the yoke that you offer us is light. Our burden is easy, Lord. It's not meant for us to struggle with this on our own. We're meant to give that to you, to let you lift that off us. I just pray you'll lead us in that today, Lord. Amen.